The first speaker tonight is Winthrop Professor Jorg Imberger. He's Director of the Centre for Water Research at the University of Western Australia, and his topic tonight is the Swan Canning Estuary, Implications for the Way We Live.
Thank you very much, Alex. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
I've been struggling lately a little bit with what I should talk about things, because technical talks about the Swan River and so forth are well known, and they're actually straightforward. What seems to be, you can lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And I'm struggling really the older I get about how do I convince people of the obvious. You tell somebody it's green and the person will say, no, it's red, Jorg. And it's just really difficult. So today I'm going to make an attempt at showing you the obvious beauty of Western Australia, to start with that. Then I'll show you a little bit what we've done with it, especially with the Swan River. And then I'll put you, like Moses' 10 Commandments, what we should be doing in the future. So the emphasis will be implications of the way we live. And this is just part of Western Australia, my property down south. And I'll start with this picture here. We had an American couple come through to the centre visiting us, and they went in, rented a car. They went from Perth to Augusta, to Albany, to Esperance, to Wade Rock, and back on the weekend. And the lady came back and said, oh, it's all the same. If you go to Switzerland, you know, they see a big mountain, some snow on the top, an edelweiss and a goat, and that's fantastic. This little part of the southwest, which I just described to you, has a greater biodiversity count endemic than the whole European and Russia put together. The beauty is unbelievable, and this is just a shot back here at my little shed where we stay overnight. It's just that little patch. You see all these different species, but you have to look. In the Swan River, if you look at the population of Western Australia, about 2.3 million, the density is 1 person per square kilometre. If you compare that with Singapore, it's 7,000 per square metre. And I had an assistant once, she was from China, and when her father and mother came, they didn't like it at all here because there weren't not enough people. They would like to sort of touch people when they were there, whereas I'm just the opposite. Average sunshine and ultra low nutrient cost. Now, if you think about 20 years ahead, what is going to be the most precious, most valuable resource in the world? Not water, not minerals, space. If you're in China, if you're in America, if you're in Germany, any country in the world, it'd be packed with people. In West Australia, if we looked after it properly, would be the one place in the world where you could go and breathe, have some space, and then see this beautiful biodiversity. That treasure will never depreciate. In fact, it will only gain. And yet we just junk it and put it under the tractor as we go along. I've got to watch the time. I thought I had an hour. We're very rich. We have incredible natural resources. We have good agriculture. But again, on the weekend I met a farmer, a son of a farmer, who basically the same story. 6 generations of farming in the wheat belt. They're going broke now. They sold it to big companies, and the big company's now running it as a big company. So the whole idea of West Australia farming is going down the tube. Tourism is, as I said before, the biodiversity is there. All you need to teach these tourists, both upmarket, backpackers, all the way through the spectrum, for how beautiful it is. You know, we have more rain in Western Australia now than we've ever had, 30% more in the last 10 years, except it's raining in the north. Well, Aborigines were much smarter. They didn't hang around where it didn't rain. They went to where it rained. They moved around. Can you imagine some fellow in Dalkeith selling his house to go to Panara because it rains more up there? It's just not possible to move people, white people like this. So we need to learn, but it's there. And if you look at wind, solar, surface waves, tidal, and thermal, we have roughly 100 times the energy used for all of Australia. And with transmission costs coming down, from the Kimberleys you can always now ship tidal power to Melbourne for the same cost as they coal to dig out of your lawn. So this opens up a whole bunch of spectrum. We just need to think a little broader. So here's what we've done to things. Just please bear in mind we are the most privileged people in the world. We have space, we have resources, we have beauty, we have biodiversity, and we have this total uniqueness about us. But now if you go to the Swan River and you take a profile, here are the numbers, take a drop, and here's the oxygen. Anything that's blue is less than 4 milligrams per liter, which means that life really can't exist. You get sporadic, little bit sort of patchy mixing, but basically from Fremantle all the way to Guildford, below a meter or so, it's dead. Now, I don't think crabs and prawns and so forth are related to Jesus, so they're not going to be resurrected. So they have to migrate back from the ocean if we're going to get them. But this stays for 3 or 4 months. It's not going to happen. The bird life is disappearing, and the sad thing about it is that when you ask people, is the bird life disappearing, there are no counts. I mean, nobody's actually done a really good bird count. Nobody's done a really good fish count. The fish people at Murdoch are telling us that, yeah, the fish are still coming in the surface layers. But you know, people actually visit a cemetery as well. And that doesn't mean that people in the coffins are suddenly alive. And that's the sad story. This is the root cause of all the problems that we have. This is the wealth pyramid. It's a global pyramid. I couldn't get a really nice diagram for Western Australia. But roughly 0.5% of the world's population controls 40% of the wealth. 67%, nearly 70% of people are less than $10,000. Most of them are negative. In the United States, a huge number of people negative. In Australia now. In 1964, the first time I came here, there wasn't a beggar in the street. Now you get lots of people begging and so forth. That's called progress. Now these people control governments now. And in Greece, you know, the Greeks weren't suddenly lazy. It's the government got together with big companies, used the taxpayers' money and broke the bank. Same thing happened in Italy, same thing happened in lots of places. 70 years ago, we used to have death duties, now we don't. And here is our culture, the problem with our culture. The first thing is technology. Humans are now have developed technology so that they can reach action globally and stress separation. A good trader on the stock market can move $1 billion in a millisecond. I mean, what do you do with it? What do you do with $1 billion in a millisecond? It's just a casino. A person in London can clear a rainforest in Brazil. A banker in Western Australia can close down a farmer, and the farmer shoots himself. But the banker will never see that action happening. The suicide rate among farmers in Western Australia is now roughly equal to Aborigines, for the same reason, being dispossessed. Timescales for change are now much shorter than healing. Cut down a tree, and the best example of that is Margaret River. You go to Margaret River and there's a little train station just before you get the little train sort of toy thing, just before you get into Margaret River and you go in. The trees are about that big and they were cleared 150 years ago. But the stumps are like 3 meters in diameter. So obviously they're 1,000 years old, so it's not a mature forest. And this is the truest statement. I was horrified when I saw it. The definition, this is the, Maya Ben Maya is a friend of mine, Israeli water commissioner. The definition of developed country is one in which citizens can waste as much as they want to, what they want, when they want. And I was absolutely horrified when I heard him say it, but it's the truth. If you just analyze your own life, I mean, the amount of garbage and everything we have is just horrendous, you know. And design engineers are the culprits. I mean, they're really the worst influence in the world. And Arthur will be... I think this is ironic because he and I opened the Center for Water Research together. We are designed for one thing, and we teach our students not to get distracted about all these externalities. And there's single focus, and you know the worst combination happened in Western Australia. Some of you have heard me say that. The first settlers came, the husbands, the men worked like crazy in the field outside to knock down all the trees and everything else. The women worked at home like crazy looking after the kids, and what did they do on Sunday? They went to church to thank God to give them the strength to wreck everything that he had built. That contradiction, that combination of women clapping and men doing the dirty things is the worst thing. And this is the way we are. These are statistics from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. 60% of girls and boys under 16 have regular sex. take drugs regularly, and suicide rate, everything else. I mean, this is what we're left with. I won't read out all the details. So we've created a society that has a mobile phone in their pocket and is looking for some sort of thrill. And the net effect is that the West Australian government now spends a quarter of its budget on mental illness. So, what are my 10 suggestions? The first one is I take a cue from the birds. Mom and Dad look after the kids. You know, if you get a new appliance in the house, you don't never ask your mom and dad, you never ask your granddad, you ask the 10-year-old kid, because granddad and dad are pretty useless. But you know, they have other skills. Indeed, we went by week after week in the Swan River, and his mom and dad were looking after these 2 chicks until they really could fly and they were self-sufficient. That continuity, just because the kids can manipulate a computer, doesn't mean that the knowledge that the elderly people have is useless. And Wenxue, who's sitting in the audience, told me something horrendous. In China, elderly people are now really disadvantaged. They can't get a taxi anymore because you can only get a taxi through a mobile phone. And if you can't use, so when I was in hospital recently, if I didn't know how to work a computer, I'd be dead, because the doctors only communicate with you through a computer. So this sort of lack of continuity is one of the chief things we need to fix. The second thing is we need to live in harmony with ourselves, nature, and time. Time scales of 50 years of destruction, repair is slower. Look what we spend on defense. Man, woman, and child in the world, we spend roughly $350 per year per person, and we spend 35 cents on education. So obviously it's much more important to kill each other, and our Prime Minister now is taking a good cue from this. He's taking it to war than to educate ourselves. If you spend a fraction of this on this, people would be more sensible, more tolerable, and they wouldn't have to go to war. If you put a few more women in charge, that need would go away as well, because they're much more holistic in their thinking. And if the women stopped clapping, the world would be much better. Progress. Here's the definition of progress. In Western Australia in 1960, a typical family consisted of 2 parents. One parent worked, it's usually the man, outside. The woman worked at home. The salary, they worked for 35 hours a week, and there's 1 year's salary of 35 hours a week, and one person was sufficient to have their mortgage. 1 year's salary was 1 mortgage. Now, 2 people work, and both sides work more than 60 hours, and they need 10 years of their salary for a mortgage. That's called progress. We need to fix this. Yeah, I know. We need to accept the planet is finite. Global warming is now no longer important in terms of what we do. The feedbacks have kicked in. The melting of the North Pole and so on is now putting more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere than we are doing. It's a long story, but I don't stress it. So we need to actually extract greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. We need to learn where to put our forests and gardens. In Netherlands and Dalkeith, one of the biggest impacts in the last 50 years since I've been there has been putting the power lines underground. The trees have come over the top of the street, the birds are all coming back. It's been and nobody thought about this externality. I don't know what the motivation was, but that's the net effect. That's great. We need multi-objective decisions, and we need to learn and accept that nature is not an unlimited bank account. And you have to also understand, I think all of us have to understand, that once a species or a culture is lost, it's lost forever. Unless you're one of these people that thinks genetically we can recreate an elephant or whatever we've gotten rid of in the past. And we need to learn somehow to live harmoniously with ourselves, with our families, with society, and with nature. And the West Australian is now full of crime in Western Australia. We now have the highest per capita crime rate, assault rate in the world. The unsafest place for a woman to be in Western Australia is at home with her partner, male partner. The safest place is to be under a tree. It's not going to fool me. We need to change the whole concept of agriculture. Agriculture, unfortunately, is the worst known enemy. They turn food into a commodity. But think of what agriculture does in the Provence. They provide food, they provide carbon sequestration, they provide biodiversity, they provide rain, and they provide a culture. If we set up a trading system for the farmers where they could cash money and make a decent living with any of these things, it would just take care of itself. And here's a graph of what trees do in terms of water. Here's the population growth of Western Australia. You can see it went up slowly, went up fast, and now it's going up like crazy. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we need skilled workers. I mean, what a bunch of bullshit. You know, Western Australians and other people are just as skilled as anybody else, and we don't need them. It's just to make the rich richer. It's nothing to do with our general well-being. Biodiversity went down the tube. And here's the rainfall in Lewin Estate. You can see it stayed pretty constant until about 2000. And only global warming only kicked in at about 2000. But if you look at the ratio of Mandarin to Lewin, you see there was a major drop in 1970. Trees are like a bionic pump. So clearing the forest between the coastline and the escarpment has removed the bionic pump. That happened in Germany, that happened in Italy, that happened in Russia, in Brazil, and all these other places where they clear forests. We want to bring rain back for the water course. What we need to do is plant about 20% of the coastal strip with trees. This is my street. You can probably guess which is my house. But the point I want to make is, even in a house like this, a small little house with forest everywhere to the great annoyance of all the neighbors, still only sequesters about 3.2, and we actually, as a family of two only put about 30 tons of carbon out per year. But you really need 2 hectares of bush per person to sequester the carbon that you emit. So I have a property in the Margaret River which sequesters enough carbon that my conscience is clear. Space, green space near the house is important for people. Aggressiveness, everything else. Kids who grow up in a house like this are far less aggressive than kids who grow up in an apartment. That's well documented, psychologically. But birds and so forth also need national parks for breeding and so forth. So that distribution, and Dawn Dickinson is sitting in the audience, she's doing a PhD on exactly this topic, trying to figure out what is the optimum distribution for both nature and for people. I won't name the person, but somebody moved into the street, they cleared down every single green thing in the place, they sprayed it with pesticide because his wife doesn't like creepy crawly things. And then they built a house right to the edge. And I said, why did you move here? And then he said, oh, it's a leafy area. There's nothing you can say. You can't have a debate with a person. I mean, he's entitled to his opinion, I'm entitled to mine, but there's no possibility. 6, curb wealth inequity. Reintroduce wealth duties, wealth death penalties. You know, we need to somehow match the time of investment or the rate of investment to the rate at which a company can accept the money. The stock market was originally created to help people outside the company to get also benefit from the company. Investment lasted for years. The company used the thing to grow. Now, as I said to you, billion in a millisecond in $1 billion, it's just a casino. Very easily fixed. You can't trade faster than the company can absorb. What's the attraction of living a life of death by clearing forest and everything else and end up as the richest corpse in the cemetery? Foster mental well-being. I just want to read this out. This is the legal limit for advertising time on television. This is my statistics, not these early ones, but these later ones, when I timed my television at home on a commercial station. If you add the embedded advertisement to the actual advertisement, you're up to 40% nowadays. And advertising is designed to make you sick. Because Norman Swan has created this relative poverty idea. It's okay if everybody's poor around you and you don't know what's on, but if you're constantly told you're not good enough, you don't look good enough, you don't do this, you don't do that, you get mentally sick and you have problems. Why don't we do something about this? The Australian Broadcasting Commission is supposed to check this. They don't. And, you know, when I give talks, people say, what can we do about it? Well, ring them up and say, hey, this is not good enough, you know. This is how Americans and Australians spend their day. You have to sleep, you have to earn some money, you have to watch some television, you prepare food, you travel to the place of work, a little bit of social time, and 10 minutes for education and exercise. You know, this is not a way to live. We can easily adjust that, but it takes time and it takes effort. Because everybody around you is living like this with their mobile phones and so forth. and you need to fit in, especially when you're younger. The other thing that's happened, and I won't go into details, but basically from 1990 to 2010, the blue is 2010, this is service industry, manufacturing's gone down, construction is sort of irrelevant, hasn't changed much. And you know, mining is not really important for West Australia in terms of employment. It's the service industry. So what's happened is that we're a service industry, China is manufacturing, US is IT, and so forth. So if you have children, like we have two, one is in Los Angeles, luckily he came home last week after 20 years. One's in London, he's a vet. You know, that leaves an enormous pressure on your family, and it's different. It's no longer the family life that we evolved with and gotten used to. This is the last slide. I just have a couple of seconds to show you the Swan River and why it's so much in need of help. And the main reason for the Swan River being in trouble is that before Seaboy O'Connor came along, there was a ridge or bar at Fremantle, and so no salt water, very little salt water went in. And so the little bit of wind mixing could mix the water column and keep the oxygen levels rich. The bar went in, but then until the 1970s, until that rain stopped, the winter could still flush it out. But since 1970, it's like a septic tank. The nutrients flow over the top in a thin layer, not stressing the estuary at all. Algae grows in the top layer, settles to the bottom, consumes the oxygen, and you're left with a mess. And if you look at the oxygen levels, it's not a very good projector, but this is data that we took at the beginning of this month on the 2nd of September. And you can see again the oxygen levels are really, really low all the way through. And then the stations where we took the stuff was shown here. And if I go to the movie, actually I've got this up here, sorry. So this is the second movie, this is the first. So this is in Fremantle Harbour. And you can see as the profiler goes down, there's a GoPro on it. And you can see a little bit at the bottom, but there sure is no very few fish. The only place where we see lots of fish and stingrays and so forth is in Coburn Sound above the seagrass beds. So that's what Fremantle Harbour looks like. And the other one is to finish off with this one here. Is what anything above the causeway looks like. So the profile is going down, and I think it's going down now. It's getting darker and darker and darker and darker. That's a combination of the algal decay, the tannins, turbidity, and I mean everything is basically settling down like in a septic tank. And look at it now. The profile hasn't reached the bottom yet, and it's totally black. No life left. So when I confront people with this, decision makers, they say, oh, but I see a dolphin. Can't be that bad, Jorg. It's a pity these dolphins come out. Should just stay away. If I talk to decision makers in London, in the London government, parliament, local Australian parliamentarians, US, anywhere I go, there is now a feeling coming in among all those people is nothing's going to change until we have a national and international disaster. So in other words, we have to sort of almost disappear. And if you look at the literature now, there's a huge number of papers coming out saying that the time for disappearing of the human race is between 20 and 30 years, which is a kind of a scary thought, and it's totally unnecessary if you follow some of it. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.